Hi, this is StrategyCast, where smart marketers and bold business thinkers share the plays behind brand breakthroughs. I'm Lori Jones, President and CEO of Avasec Communications. If your go-to-market strategy feels harder to run than it used to, decisions take longer, teams struggle to align, and it's not always clear what's driving results, this episode will help you rethink why. Today, you'll learn why many GTM systems stop working as organizations grow, how mismatched processes and expectations create noise instead of insight, and what it looks like to design a GTM system that helps teams coordinate, learn, and make better strategic decisions over time. My guest, Tim Hillison, brings a systems-level perspective to go-to-market strategies that cut through both legacy thinking and AI hype. Tim works with leaders to redesign GTM foundations for modern markets with a practical, grounded view of where AI supports better coordination and learning, and why strong fundamentals matter more than ever.
A competitive edge starts with strategy, and strategy starts with knowing how to develop one. StrategyCast is a leading marketing podcast that serves up strategic insights, trends, and tips to help separate your business from the pack. Tune in weekly as host Lori Jones interviews bold marketing leaders who have priceless wisdom and are willing to share. Each episode explores cutting-edge approaches that have proven instrumental in transforming brands into industry trailblazers.
Welcome to the show, Tim.
Hi, Lori. How are you? It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Gosh, I'm awesome because you're here. That's for sure. This is your encore interview on StrategyCast. Thank you so much, Tim. You always provide such incredible insights to our audiences. Before we roll up our sleeves and really dig into the topic today, tell us a little bit more about your journey and why you really found this true passion in GTM.
Well, Lori, that's a great question. Let's remember, most go-to-market systems were built when teams were bigger and roles were clearer, and people knew who owned what. Now teams are smaller, work overlaps, and decisions cut across more functions. The way that decisions are made has not kept up with that shift. At Entry Point One, we help engineering-led startups and mid-market scale-ups on exactly this problem.
Yeah. Well, and you hit the nail on top of the head. These GTM systems were absolutely also designed when roles were more stable. What has changed, and why is GTM so much harder today than it was, a year ago or 5 years ago?
Well, you're right. It's harder and it's structural. Channels have multiplied. Customer journeys are spread across many touch points, and that weakens signal and makes it harder to know what's actually working.
Yeah.
At the same time, work now spans the full GTM team: product, sales, marketing, customer success. Coordinating data and decisions across those teams takes more and more time, more tools, and more negotiation. And when systems can't absorb that complexity, decisions fall back to hierarchy. And this is where that strain comes from that you're talking about.
So is the software causing the strain, or is it truly the individuals and such a large team involved that's causing the strain?
Well, there's various factors, but at the core, it's decision breakdown. And one of the reasons is the software that we used to use and 275 tools that the average organization uses is much deterministic. Put an input in, spits an input out. Whereas, as strong teams continue to execute, but the system around them isn't helping them decide. And when decision-making does not evolve with the way work changes, complexity shows up in confusion, reworks, and frustrations.
Yeah. And you said a lot of those signals that truly aren't based on someone making a buying decision, they're an incorrect signal.
That's absolutely true. And, what we find is that, look, Right now, say that there's a dozen channels, right? Before, when there were two, you were able to pinpoint where the signal came from with a little bit more clarity. Now, things are so diffuse and the permutations so wide, it's really hard to actually attribute when a customer came in through what and how.
Yeah. You have also talked a lot about that a lot of the problems with GTM actually show up in meetings. And I'm just visualizing right now, a team meeting, and you've got all these individuals at the table just discussing all sorts of different things. What do you mean by that? And how does it really show up?
Lori, meetings aren't the problem, they're the symptom.
Yeah.
And we've all been in meetings debating which campaign is really working, or how do we clean up this dashboard for leadership? Those conversations can feel very productive, but really what they are signals. And they tell us that the system is not providing enough clarity. When the system can't resolve the complexity, people try to resolve it instead. And that's when subjectivity creeps in and decisions lean in on hierarchy.
So where do leaders tend to misdiagnose then?
Well, let's give an example. SDRs and events are a great example. They both have different physics, right? SDRs generate fast, repeatable signal. You can adjust and iterate week to week, where events work on a different timeline altogether and are a demand anchor. They build trust and positioning. But the mistake is governing these two components the exact same way in an outbound GTM motion. When we expect the same signal on the same timeline for different tactics, we don't get clarity, we lose it.
So do you think it's, just the simple fact that people are treating everything the same, that's where it breaks down?
Well, standardization feels like control.
Mhm.
But when systems level literacy is lacking or thin, it changes how the results get interpreted within the organization. And when leaders fully don't understand how a GTM motion works, they reach for uniform metrics and reporting,
Mhm.
right? It makes comparison easier, but it flattens important differences. And let's remember, scale does not come from generic work. It comes from systems that let different kinds of work behave predictably.
Can you give us an example of this very same thing where you had a GTM, two GTM efforts, perhaps, that were managed the same, but they really should not have been?
Sure. Say that you have a campaign, and that campaign includes an outbound SDR motion, right? Or to support the campaign, where they're calling and they've got certain messaging and they're iterating on that messaging and they're talking and they're getting signal and leads are coming in, right? And say that, the marketing department is running a brand event, the biggest event of the year, and part of that, and they're launching their ads and they have advertising and they have finally the event. Well, the SDR motion gets signal almost immediately from the calls. I mean, usually you can get who has consumed the content leading up to the event and after the event, but really it takes place at the event. So comparing those two signals to be exactly the same is wrong.
Yeah. Well, and the attribution isn't correct at that stage. I mean, it's a false narrative.
Right. And, you know me very well. I am not a big believer in attribution. I think it's more of an accounting exercise, and that, selling and marketing and go to market is often social science.
Yeah.
However, within a system, if we're looking deterministically at how things are built as opposed to building an adaptive GTM engine with AI that evolves with our customers, it's completely different. And
Yeah.
so here, what we want to do is understand which motion is going to help us, for example, get leads, SDR, or change market perception, the event, right?
Yeah.
But, we can get leads from the event, but not on the same timeline as the SDR campaign.
I think something else that really adds a layer of complexity to all of this is the brand work on and the awareness work on top of funnel, which absolutely ebbs and flows as well. So a signal that might take place, mid-funnel when you've got a brand campaign running versus a signal that takes place mid-funnel when the brand campaign is not running, I think can really provide great insight, but yet confuse the insight as well when you're not comparing what's on and off.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the things that we can do now with much more clarity and certainty is be rapidly experimenting with when that should be used or not. And you could try, for example, that tactic or that content piece in MOFU, middle of funnel, right? In certain geographies and not in others, and compare them or against certain industries. And now the adaptive nature of our GTM systems allows us to do that much easier, whereas the software of past did not.
Yeah. Compare and contrast for us really quick, adaptive and the past. What are we really obtaining today versus what we were unable to or really had to hunt for of the past?
So that's a great question, Lori. And what adaptive actually means in practice is it means less surprises, right? When the ICP is clear, when motions behave more predictably, and fewer decisions get revisited, and this is what I meant about meetings, right? I mean, not going back and constantly reworking things, right? Because let's remember, artificial intelligence does not fix fuzzy inputs. It's
Right.
going to amplify them.
It
So if
doesn't
you
fix
have
bad messaging.
Right. So if you have bad messaging, it's just amplified it even more, right?
Right.
And so it's about this clarity of inputs leading to better outputs.
So if you were to prescribe an AI system for a small company to use to get started today, what would that prescription look like? What systems could they be deploying that could really help them obtain the intelligence that you're talking about?
Right. That's a bit dangerous because, AI is so broad and companies are all different, right? So let's diagnose this, right? So first of all, again, as we talked about, AI does not fix broken systems. So we're going to have to go in and understand how that system currently works, right? But I can tell you with certainty in what I've seen in the market, and I'd love to hear what you've seen, is that most AI is being used at the output layer, right? Which is why so much of it looks the same, from content to websites to, again, AI slop, or one of my favorites, slopaganda, right? I mean, it all looks sort of the same. But where AI helps is actually earlier. And
Yeah.
that is, before the plans are locked, before the content is produced, and before the meetings turn into debates. And if it's used as an input, it can reduce confusion around that strategy instead of speeding it up. And so I would tell you that, if AI is being used as a bolt on top of things just to produce output, it's probably too late. And what really needs to happen is it needs to go inside where, again, we're identifying which use cases make the most sense and understanding how we rework those processes so that system can actually adapt to those new inputs.
Are you seeing the generative or adaptive AI systems work well with the development of, you know, let's really go back to home base here, the first party data? A lot of companies have very, very few contacts. And if they can really work to generate more with AI, that's certainly going to help everything downstream.
I think that, first party, second party, third party data and how they're used is not only a mark of organizational maturity, but it really is about that clarity on fundamentals, like we talked about, right? And that is, if you're using, again, the wrong data, or you don't know who you're targeting, then you're going to continue targeting the wrong people, right? And so really breaking it down and understanding how we use first party data to find lookalikes, for
Yeah.
example, or to create synthetic ICPs and personas. This is a big help, and you can shave, we at Entry Point One shave sometimes 70% off of, a typical market research engagement by doing that with solid results coming up in pipeline.
Yeah. You and Avocet and I have been very, very early adopters to AI. We've seen the value of it for years and years and years, even before people started to worry about it. We've used it for a long time. We've had an AI council in the agency for a long time. AI is only as good as the strategic input, is what we feel. And that's really one of the most important pieces. But still, it is and can be a distraction.
Mhm.
How should leaders think about AI without turning it into a distraction?
Um, I think that the way I would focus that, and it's a great point, Lori, is what skills matter most right now, right? And that is we know that execution varies widely across startups, scale-ups, and enterprises. There's strong execution and there's poor execution, and the different usually isn't in effort or intent. But what I see most is teams executing inside systems that don't match the work, right? And that is goals are unclear, signals are noisy, like you were talking about before with the example of the campaign, decisions getting constantly revisited, employees getting burnt out. And in that type of environment, teams struggle to produce consistent results. And so two skills matter most to me when I'm seeing in the market from the different companies that we serve is first is fundamentals. Know who you are selling to, how value is created by your company, and how your company or our companies actually go to market. Is it outbound, inbound, product-led partnerships, expansion, and how these motions behave differently,
Right.
right? The second, though, is systems literacy. Understanding how decisions get made, where information degrades as it moves across teams, and how changes in one part of the GTM motion affect the rest.
Yeah.
These are the skills that allow execution to produce reliable outcomes.
There's so many incredible nuggets in what you just said, and I want to break down something for our listeners today, and that is what is the perfect team setup for managing everything through the GTM funnel? So right now, you've described a system that has way too many people and parts and probably software and decision making that is not aligned. So let's pretend that you are a brand and you have an agency supporting you. What should be managed internally and what should the agency have their hands on?
Well, again, I again, it's a great parallel in what's happening in the world right now,
Mhm.
right? Um, First of all, I think that it's incredibly important to understand that, for instance, marketing works inside a go-to-market ecosystem, right? So again, product sales, marketing, customer success, RevOps, enablement. It's not just marketing, it's not siloed, right?
Right.
And so, that system is important. The second thing is the communication and what are those responsibilities or outcomes that team is responsible for. So they could be working for or they could be in charge of an agency relationship. What is the strategy and what are the outcomes that agency would be responsible for? And then how is that going to amplify or be handed off to the other departments to be used too? Because, sales and product customer success, they're depending on marketing. Like marketing is depending on sales and customer success. And so it's really important to understand what that system is. And this is why we were talking about how decisions are getting passed off, how signals degrade when they're passed. It's really important that that's that systems thinking. We're developing something for the whole, not for a part. And so how are customers going to use that and interpret and derive value at that at scale? And how will the teams internally support that?
It's so interesting because you and I both work with a lot of individuals that have like engineering backgrounds, engineering mindsets. And marketers today, without that engineering mindset, with all the technology that is deployed, I think really do themselves a disservice. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Or they've got to learn in far greater detail on how they're going to bring people to the table that truly can manage the system, if you will.
Yeah.
In this environment, what skills actually helps marketers stay credible? It's not easy.
Well, know your buyer. So, for example, we've got internal buyers and we've got external buyers. And so, for example, if your CEO is an accounting type and is very numerical, then you should be leaning more heavily. One should be leaning more heavily into the numbers, right? But that doesn't mean that the qualitative is unimportant either. And so, really, it's about understanding not only who your buyers are, who is that ICP that you're selling to, and then again, how is that value going to be translated? It's very interesting because in positioning work, one of the things we talk about all the time is a lot of companies want to position themselves for the future in something that they still don't sell. That's not going to work. People are still going to say, but your product doesn't do that right now. And so what happens now is there is a proliferation because we're all software engineers and what's on the market. But really, how can we be confident that we're going to be using a product, for example, one of the MarTech tools, for example, that is going to give us these solid results and allow us to be able to not only answer those questions internally from the managers that you're talking about, but externally to the buyers that are buying our products.
It's so interesting because the complex nature of what we're talking about today. So are we creating more complexity? Are we overthinking? Are we using too many tools? Are we underestimating? Or are we actually, do we just have to dive through it all to ultimately get to the answer that we need?
It's based on how, so this is incredibly human, right? Remember when we went through the internet, or remember the different recessions and what they brought and all of these different things. Look, we're just adapting, right? And work is becoming different. And so, when we think about how fast work is changing, but how slow go-to-market systems have been evolving with them, this is where there is some complexity, but let's think about humanity and how we work together, and then the types of systems that we'll use and the capabilities that we have. And we find out that first, look, the GTM motions, be clear on how our companies go to market, not what's on a slide, right? But it's really what's happening to the SDRs, what's happening in events, the product-led motion, right? Partnerships, expansion, name them and don't treat them all the same. They're different. Okay. Second, signals for each motion. Let's ask ourselves, what really is reducing uncertainty? Right? Not what looks clean in a dashboard, but what tells us if the motion is actually working or not. And then different motions produce different signals. We've talked about this, but they're also on different timelines. We have to also advocate for that. You can't be a marketer who just says, okay, it didn't work. No. Tell people you're the expert. Third, decisions. Look at what decisions come up in meetings. Right? This is usually a sign that the system isn't enough clarity. If you're just going and trying to interpret and reinterpret in the meeting, then how are you going to automate that? I mean, that's the system breakdown, right? So we need to design the system where fewer decisions depend on debate. They are much more objective because they are more data centric. And that is one of the great things about AI, right? And it's funny because, here at Entry Point One, one of the things we say is that, AI crunches the numbers, we build relationships because we believe in that human centric approach. People do business with people, and yes, we'll do business with agents too, but maybe on a procurement basis, right? I mean, not actually on a decision basis for the company, right? So
what percent of GTM motions today, all things considered, do you feel have been overcomplicated because of leadership decisions? Marketing leads overcomplicating it versus just simplifying the approach and moving right along?
It's a fascinating question. I mean, I would say, again, let's make sure that we understand that all companies are different and they implement these different too. And they have a set of experts that do or do not understand them, right? I would say that probably what gets the most hype is outbound. Last year, there was a survey by GTM Partners that was talking about like 87% think that outbound needs to be rehyped. And, I don't know about you, but my inbox is flooded. Right. And so, this is just systematic of it. However, it still shows that email is the number one channel for how people relate and get business. And so this tells me that, although there's a lot of confusion by people and overhyped, like you're saying, we're producing more and more. And so there's misinformation and disinformation that we need to sort through. And so those relationships and that trust becomes more of an anchor than ever.
So, what do strong marketers do differently when things do get politically, or political or noisy, or, there's no agreement in the room, or people are dismissing certain signals when they should be really paying attention to them?
I think three things matter. Again, let's be clear about how we go to market. Name the different motions. I mean, raise your hand if it's not having the impact that it should. Secondly, let's get honest about what those signals are. And that is not just within marketing, but across the GTM team, right? There should be agreement. And it's not just what's easy to report, it's what actually is working. And third, where are those decisions keeping on breaking down? Look, how many times did we talk about in past lives that sales hated the leads that marketing is bringing? I mean, we should not be reworking, or we should be working hand in hand and developing what that criteria is for those things and adapting with it. But let's remember too, our market is adapting faster than ever as well. And with this technology, it is going to take work and rolling up our sleeves to do it. And so again, adaptive GTM isn't about predicting everything. It's about redesigning systems that make people better at taking decisions as things change. That's the adaptation, right? And so, and it's different than what we're used to, and that's why it takes work.
Yeah, it sure does. What's the cost of not evolving here?
Oh, I think that we're going to see a lot of companies fall off the map.
Yeah.
Not only everything's evolving right now, customer behavior, how we buy, what we buy. And as there are more and more solutions for something, we are going to decide what fits our business better. And so there will continue to be more choice, but how and who we do business with is going to become more important than ever in 2026.
I could not agree with you more. If a marketing leader feels overwhelmed by the complexity that we've certainly established today, and quite frankly, what they're experiencing themselves, what's the one place they should focus on in the next 90 days to regain control?
Again, fundamentals and systems literacy. So, you need to know how things work. We gave a very simple example of SDRs and events. I was not being facetious, but many people flatten them and lump them together and say it's leads and leads. And look, they have different timelines. And not only that, one is very transactional, whereas one could change your entire market position. They're completely different, right? The second is, again, the systems literacy. When I say tongue in cheek, it's about meetings. What I'm saying is how are your meetings? Are you reworking things? Is it a debate? Is it a constant fight? That is friction in your system, right? These things should be able to go much smoother, but you got to understand, how are we going to do that? And what do we need in order to work together and decide together? I'll tell you, for me, it's all about data.
Well, I tell you, I think a lot of people listening to the show today are going to agree with that. Tim, as always, you've been incredibly helpful, insightful, smart, and I just love the conversations that we have. I know that our audience will as well. And what is the best way for them to get in contact with you?
Thank you, Laura. I appreciate it. It's always great to be here. If anything we talked about felt familiar, the easiest way to find me is on LinkedIn. I'm Tim Hillison, and if you'd like to understand how we work, you can find us at entrypointone.com.
Well, I tell you, you're amazing. And if you'd like to get a hold of me, LinkedIn is the best place as well. Lori Sartorius Jones there. Tim, thank you so much for kicking off 2026 on StrategyCast.
Thank you very much, Lori.
That's a wrap. Thanks for joining us on today's show. We hope your strategic brains are spinning with new ideas and bold inspiration that will elevate your strategies and marketing know-how.